Welcome back to Legacy News, where we uncover the most fascinating stories from cinema's golden era. Today, we're exploring a revelation that sheds new light on some of the most beloved stars who ever graced the silver screen. Behind the dazzling premieres and perfectly crafted studio portraits of Hollywood's golden age lay secrets that the powerful studio system was determined to keep hidden from the public. Chief among these was the private truth about certain leading men whose carefully manufactured public images as romantic heartthrobs and masculine ideals concealed very different personal realities. No one understood this hidden world better than Randolph Scott, the stoic, square-jawed hero of over 60 classic westerns. With his chiseled features and understated authority, Scott epitomized the strong, silent cowboy who stood for justice and moral clarity. For millions of moviegoers from the 1930s through the 1950s, he represented an uncomplicated vision of American masculinity. Yet off-screen, Scott moved through Hollywood with the quiet awareness of an insider who recognized the enormous gap between public perception and private truth. As his remarkable career put him in close contact with the industry's biggest names, he became privy to the hidden struggles of colleagues forced to construct elaborate facades around their personal lives. In an extraordinary revelation made in his later years, Scott named 6 legendary actors who had to hide their identities in an era when being gay could instantly destroy not just a career, but potentially lead to public disgrace and even criminal prosecution. Tonight, we'll count down these 6 iconic figures, exploring not just who they were on screen, but the remarkable courage they showed in building meaningful lives despite extraordinary obstacles. Scott's testimony provides a unique window into a hidden chapter of Hollywood history, one that adds new depth to our understanding of these beloved stars. Before we begin our countdown, take a moment to subscribe to Legacy News and ring that notification bell. We bring you meticulously researched stories about cinema's most fascinating legends, always prioritizing historical accuracy while delivering the intriguing behind-the-scenes details you won't find anywhere else. 6. Jim Nabors, the gentle giant with a secret. We begin our countdown with Jim Nabors, a television star whose public persona could hardly have been further from his private reality. To millions of viewers in the 1960s, Nabors was immediately recognizable as the lovable, naive Gomer Pyle, first on The Andy Griffith Show, and later on the successful spin-off Gomer Pyle USMC. With his catchphrase, "golly," and wide-eyed innocence, Nabors created a character of childlike simplicity that captured America's heart. His Gomer Pyle was wholesome, guileless, and utterly non-threatening, the perfect embodiment of small-town America's idealized vision of itself during an increasingly turbulent decade. Few of the viewers who welcomed Nabors into their living rooms each week could have imagined that the actor portraying this simple Marine private was living a carefully guarded private life completely at odds with his on-screen character. Jim had perhaps the greatest contrast between his public image and private reality, Randolph Scott reportedly remarked. On screen, he played the most naively innocent character imaginable. Off-screen, he was a sophisticated, well-read man who had to navigate an incredibly complex double life. Nabors' path to stardom had been unusual. Born in Alabama in 1930, he initially worked as a typist at the United Nations before moving to Los Angeles for health reasons in the 1950s. His powerful baritone singing voice, which would later surprise audiences who only knew his Gomer Pyle twang, earned him nightclub engagements, where he was discovered by Andy Griffith. What audiences didn't see was Nabors' decades-long relationship with Stan Cadwallader, which began in 1975 when Cadwallader was working as a firefighter in Honolulu. The relationship would remain private for nearly 40 years, until the couple finally married in Washington State in 2013, when Nabors was 82 years old, just a few years before his death at age 87. The most painful part for Jim wasn't just hiding his relationship, noted a close friend. It was the vicious urban legend that circulated in the early 1970s, falsely claiming he had secretly married Rock Hudson. The rumor distressed both men deeply and showed how Hollywood's rumor mill could be weaponized against gay entertainers. The false rumor about Nabors and Hudson was reportedly started deliberately to damage both actors and became so widespread that it affected their careers. Nabors' variety show was canceled shortly after the rumor gained traction, and he retreated to Hawaii, where he lived a quieter life while still performing occasionally. For Randolph Scott, Nabors represented a younger generation of performers who still faced many of the same constraints that stars of his own era had navigated. Though the cultural landscape had shifted somewhat by the 1960s and 1970s, 1970s, the professional consequences of being openly gay remained severe, particularly for actors whose appeal rested on a certain type of non-threatening masculinity. What makes Neighbor's story particularly poignant is how the qualities that made Gomer Pyle beloved, his innocence, his gentleness, his fundamental decency, were genuine aspects of Neighbor's own character, even as the public remained unaware of his complete identity. Jim created laughter for millions while carrying this burden, Scott reportedly said. He brought joy to people who might have rejected him had they known who he truly was. That's a particular kind of courage, to give happiness to a world that denies your right to be yourself. When Neighbors finally married Cadwallader after nearly 4 decades together, he made a simple statement. It's pretty obvious that we had no rights as a couple, yet when you've been together 38 years, I think something's got to happen there. This understated comment revealed both the quiet dignity with which he had conducted his private life and the enormous patience required to wait so long for public recognition. Jim Neighbor's journey from hiding his identity to finally achieving legal recognition of his relationship serves as a powerful bookend to our countdown, representing both how much Hollywood's gay actors once had to conceal and how much American society has evolved since the era when Randolph Scott first observed these hidden lives. 5. Cesar Romero, Hollywood's elegant bachelor. In the 5th position of our countdown is a man whose aristocratic bearing and sophisticated charm made him a fixture in Hollywood for over 6 decades. Cesar Romero, known to earlier generations as a dashing leading man and to later audiences as the flamboyant Joker in the 1960s Batman television series, maintained one of Hollywood's most enduring and carefully crafted public images. Born to a wealthy Cuban family in 1907, Romero brought genuine aristocratic lineage to his roles. Cesar was unique, Randolph Scott reportedly observed. He was playing a role as the sophisticated international playboy both on and off screen. The difference was that off screen, it was a performance designed to conceal rather than reveal. Romero's film career began in the early 1930s and would span an astonishing 60 years, encompassing more than 200 film and television appearances. His elegant manner and good looks initially cast him as a Latin lover type, though he would later show remarkable versatility in everything from musicals to westerns to horror films. Perhaps his most famous role came late in his career when he portrayed the Joker in the campy, colorful Batman television series of the 1960s. Throughout his long career, Romero maintained what Hollywood euphemistically called bachelor status. Never marrying, he was frequently photographed escorting various glamorous actresses to premieres and industry events. As one of Hollywood's most eligible perpetual bachelors, he cultivated a public persona as a charming ladies' man while carefully avoiding actual romantic entanglements. Cesar handled it with extraordinary grace, Scott said. He created a public persona that satisfied Hollywood's expectations while allowing him a degree of personal authenticity. Everyone who knew him respected how beautifully he managed this impossible situation. What made Romero's strategy particularly effective was his genuine warmth and social skill. Unlike some stars who became reclusive due to fears of exposure, Romero remained a fixture of Hollywood's social life, known for hosting elegant dinner parties at his home and maintaining friendships across the industry. His genuine love of socializing allowed him to be visible without being vulnerable. Romero's strategy also included careful selection of his film roles. While he occasionally played romantic leads, particularly early in his career, he more frequently portrayed supporting characters where romantic chemistry with leading ladies wasn't the primary focus. Elegant villains, aristocratic fathers, and eventually the wildly theatrical Joker. There was a knowing quality to some of Cesar's performances. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Romero lived long enough to see significant changes in social attitudes. In his later years, he became somewhat more open about his sexuality among trusted friends, though he never made a public declaration. Having built his entire career and public identity around a certain image, he maintained that persona until his death in 1994 at the age of 86. What makes Romero's story particularly significant in Randolph Scott's recollections is how it demonstrates the different strategies gay actors developed to navigate Hollywood's constraints. While some lived in torment over their necessary deceptions, Romero created a life of genuine elegance and social connection, finding ways to thrive despite the limitations imposed upon him. Of all of us who had to live carefully, Scott reportedly said, Cesar perhaps found the most graceful solution. He created a life filled with beauty, friendship, and dignity. He deserved to live freely, but within the constraints that existed, he fashioned something remarkable. 4. Merv Griffin, the Empire Builder. At number 4 in our countdown is a man who transformed himself from a big band singer into one of the most powerful figures in American entertainment. Merv Griffin built a media empire that included hit game shows, a successful talk show, and extensive real estate holdings, all while maintaining a carefully managed public image that revealed almost nothing of his personal life. Born in 1925 in San Mateo, California, Griffin began his entertainment career as a singer with Freddie Martin's orchestra, scoring a hit with "I've Got a Lovely Bunch of Coconuts" in 1949. His pleasant voice and affable personality led to a short-lived film contract with Warner Brothers, though his true talents would prove to be behind the camera rather than in front of it. Merv took a different approach than many of us, Randolph Scott reportedly observed. Instead of remaining dependent on studios and producers who could control his image and career, he became the producer. He built a kingdom where he made the rules. Griffin's business acumen first revealed itself when he created and produced the game show Jeopardy! In 1964, followed by Wheel of Fortune in 1975. Both would become television institutions, generating billions in revenue over the decades. When he sold his production company to Coca-Cola in 1986, the price was an astounding $250 million. At that time, the largest acquisition of an entertainment company ever made. Griffin's strategy included a brief marriage to Julian Wright from 1958 to 1976, which produced a son, Tony. After the divorce, Griffin never remarried, and while rumors about his sexuality circulated throughout his career, he never publicly addressed them. When asked directly in interviews about persistent speculation, he would deflect with humor, once famously telling the New York Times, "I tell everybody that I'm a quarter sexual. I will do anything with anybody for a quarter." The contrast between Griffin's public joviality and his intense private guarding of personal information created an interesting paradox. As a talk show host, his job was to draw others out, to create intimate conversations for public consumption. Yet he himself remained fundamentally unknowable to his audience, a smiling presence who revealed little beyond his enthusiasm for his guests and his business ventures. Griffin created a brilliantly effective strategy, noted media historian Amy Henderson. By controlling the means of production, literally owning the shows he created, he insulated himself from the kind of studio pressure that could force actors into arranged marriages or other public relations stunts. He could set the terms of his own visibility. Unlike some figures in our countdown, Griffin continued to thrive professionally throughout changing cultural eras. As social attitudes evolved from the restrictive 1950s through the more progressive 1970s and beyond, Griffin adapted his public presentation while maintaining his core privacy. His business empire continued to expand, eventually including hotels, casinos, and extensive real estate holdings. When Griffin died in 2007 at age 82, obituaries focused almost exclusively on his professional achievements and philanthropy. Even in death, the privacy he had so carefully maintained largely held firm, with most mainstream media sources either ignoring or only obliquely referencing the aspects of his personal life he had chosen not to share publicly. For Randolph Scott, Griffin represented a different kind of response to Hollywood's constraints, not the tortured artist like Montgomery Clift or the elegant social navigator like Cesar Romero, but the empire builder who created his own rules. 3. Montgomery Clift, the tortured soul. Our countdown continues with an actor whose raw emotional performances revolutionized American film acting and influenced generations of performers to follow. Montgomery Clift brought a new kind of masculine vulnerability to Hollywood cinema, sensitive, introspective, and psychologically complex in ways that contrasted sharply with the more straightforward heroism of earlier stars like Randolph Scott himself. Born in 1920 to a wealthy but highly unconventional family, Clift began his career on Broadway at age 15. By the time he made his film debut in 1948's Red River, opposite John Wayne, he had already established himself as a serious stage actor with a distinctive approach to character. From his very first screen appearance, critics and audiences recognized something different about Clift, an intensity and emotional transparency that felt revolutionary. Monty changed everything, Randolph Scott reportedly said. When he came to Hollywood, most of us, myself included, were playing types rather than fully realized people. Monty showed a generation of actors how to bring their whole nervous systems to the screen. The cost to him personally was enormous. In films like A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity, and Suddenly, last summer, Clift created performances of extraordinary psychological depth, characters struggling with moral ambiguity, emotional conflict, and inner turmoil. Off-screen, however, Clift lived with conflicts that mirrored the torment of his most famous roles. Though his homosexuality was an open secret within Hollywood circles, the broader public remained unaware. For a leading man built building his career on romantic dramas opposite actresses like Elizabeth Taylor and Olivia de Havilland, public knowledge of his sexuality would have been professionally devastating. Montgomery Clift faced a particular kind of anguish, observed Scott. He was literally splitting himself in two, putting the most emotionally honest acting imaginable on screen while simultaneously having to conceal fundamental truths about himself off screen. The contradiction was irreconcilable and ultimately destructive. The turning point in Clift's life and career came in 1956, when he suffered a devastating car accident while filming Raintree County. Driving home from a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, he crashed into a telephone pole, severely damaging his once perfect face. Taylor reportedly ran to the scene and pulled broken teeth from his throat to prevent him from choking, an act that may have saved his life. Extensive surgery partially reconstructed his features, but Clift's appearance was permanently altered. More significantly, the accident accelerated his dependence on alcohol and painkillers, which he had begun using earlier to manage both physical pain and emotional distress. What happened to Monty wasn't just about the accident or the substances, Scott reportedly said. It was about the impossibility of reconciling his public and private selves. He was someone whose natural instinct was toward emotional truth, forced to live a fundamental lie. The division broke him apart. By the early 1960s, Clift's physical and mental health had deteriorated significantly. Though he continued to work sporadically, his behavior became increasingly erratic, and his once remarkable beauty had given way to a haggard vulnerability. On July 23, 1966, he died alone in his New York townhouse at age 45. The official cause listed as a heart attack. Elizabeth Taylor, who remained one of Clift's closest friends throughout his struggles, perhaps best summarized his tragedy. Monty could have been the biggest star in the world if he had made one concession to the world. But he wouldn't. He could not compromise. He was a perfectionist, the finest actor I've ever known, and he didn't give a damn. He was totally uncompromising, both professionally and personally. What makes Clift's story particularly significant in Randolph Scott's Revelations is how it illustrates the profound psychological cost of Hollywood's demands for conformity. Unlike Cesar Romero, who found a way to create a satisfying life within the constraints of his era, or Merv Griffin, who built a fortress of power and wealth as protection, Clift found no sustainable way to reconcile his authentic self with the demands of stardom. Of all the actors I knew who had to hide their true selves, Scott reportedly said, Monty suffered the most visibly. His brilliance as an actor came from the same place as his vulnerability as a man, an inability to be anything but emotionally honest. In a system that demanded dishonesty about something so fundamental to identity, that gift became a curse. 2. Rock Hudson, the tragic icon. As we near the top of our countdown, we come to the star whose private struggle and public revelation would ultimately force a fundamental shift in America's understanding of both homosexuality and the AIDS epidemic. Rock Hudson embodied masculine ideals for a generation of moviegoers, only to become in death the most famous face of a crisis many Americans had previously chosen to ignore. Born Roy Harold Scherer Jr. in 1925, Hudson grew up in modest circumstances in Winnetka, Illinois. His path to stardom began when agent Henry Wilson spotted his striking good looks and transformed him into Rock Hudson, the stage name itself embodying a manufactured masculine ideal of strength and solidity. Standing 6 feet 5 inches with classically handsome features, Hudson quickly established himself as one of Hollywood's most marketable leading men. Rock was Henry Wilson's masterpiece, Randolph Scott reportedly observed. Henry specialized in finding handsome young men and transforming them into stars. What made Rock unique was the genuine talent and warmth beneath the spectacular packaging. The public responded to something authentic in him, even while not knowing his complete truth. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Hudson starred in a series of successful films that established him as the epitome of American masculinity. In Douglas Sirk melodramas like Magnificent Obsession and All That Heaven Allows, he played romantic leads whose strength was matched by emotional sensitivity. Later, in romantic comedies with Doris Day like Pillow Talk and Lover Come Back, he demonstrated a gift for light comedy while maintaining his image as the ideal heterosexual heartthrob. Behind this carefully crafted public image image lay an entirely different private reality. Hudson was gay, a fact known within industry circles but concealed from the public through an elaborate system of protection and management. His agent, Henry Wilson, not only created and maintained Hudson's image, but actively worked to suppress any potential rumors or exposures that might damage it. The machinery around Rock was extensive, Scott said. Studio publicists, friendly journalists, arranged dates with appropriate starlets, all designed to maintain the fiction that this handsome leading man was exactly what he appeared to be on screen. This management included a brief marriage to Wilson's secretary, Phyllis Gates, from 1955 to 1958. Long presented as a genuine relationship that simply didn't work out, the marriage has since been widely recognized as arranged specifically to counter rumors about Hudson's sexuality. Gates later claimed she had not known about Hudson's homosexuality when they married, though this assertion has been disputed by others who knew the couple. The contrived marriage represented just one aspect of the complex performance Hudson maintained throughout his public life. Fan magazines regularly published stories about his supposed romantic interests in various actresses, while studio publicity departments arranged dates for photographers to capture. Meanwhile, Hudson's actual relationships remained strictly hidden, conducted in private homes and carefully vetted social circles. What made Rock's situation particularly poignant, observed Scott, was that he was selling a very specific kind of romantic fantasy to audiences, especially female audiences. His entire career was built around being the ideal man that women could dream about marrying. The gap between that public image and his private reality was perhaps the widest of any star in Hollywood. Despite these pressures, associates described Hudson as generally good-humored and well-adjusted within the constraints of his situation. Unlike Montgomery Clift, whose similar predicament contributed to psychological torment, Hudson seemed to accept the necessities of his public performance as the price of his success. He maintained close friendships within the industry, enjoyed his material success, and found ways to create a meaningful personal life despite the limitations imposed upon him. Rock found a certain peace within an impossible situation, Scott reportedly said. He understood the rules of the game he was playing and played it well, without letting the performance consume him completely, at least until the end. The end Scott referred to came tragically in 1985, when Hudson became one of the first major celebrities to die from AIDS-related complications. The revelation of both his sexuality and his illness came as a profound shock to the general public, who had known him only as the robust, virile leading man of countless romantic films. Hudson's illness first became publicly visible during an appearance promoting a new TV project with former co-star Doris Day in July 1985. Looking gaunt and unwell, Hudson's deteriorated appearance sparked immediate speculation. Days later, his publicist confirmed that Hudson was being treated for AIDS in Paris, effectively acknowledging his homosexuality as well. The announcement sent shockwaves through American society. Here was Rock Hudson, the ultimate masculine ideal, the man who had romanced Elizabeth Taylor and Doris Day on screen, dying from a disease then primarily associated with gay men. The cognitive dissonance was enormous for many Americans who had never questioned Hudson's carefully constructed public image. Rock's illness and death changed everything, Scott observed. Suddenly, this disease that many Americans had chosen to ignore had the face of someone they felt they knew and loved, and the reality of gay lives that had been carefully hidden from public view could no longer be denied. Hudson died on October 2, 1985, at age 59. His death generated unprecedented media coverage and public discussion of both homosexuality and AIDS. Former co-star Elizabeth Taylor became a leading AIDS activist, and donations to AIDS research organizations increased dramatically. President Ronald Reagan, who had not previously publicly addressed the AIDS crisis despite thousands of deaths, finally spoke about the disease after his friend Hudson's diagnosis. What makes Hudson's story particularly significant in Randolph Scott's revelations is how it embodies both the most extreme requirements of Hollywood image-making and its ultimate unraveling. For decades, Hudson had maintained a nearly perfect public facade, only to have it completely collapse at the end of his life, creating a cultural moment that permanently changed American perceptions of both celebrity images and homosexuality. Rock's final act of public honesty, even if not entirely voluntary, may have been his most important, Scott reportedly said. In death, he accomplished something that none of us could do in the prime of our careers. He showed America the human reality behind the carefully constructed myths of Hollywood. Hudson's legacy extends far beyond his films. While younger generations may not be familiar with his work in movies like Giant or Pillow Talk, his name remains synonymous with a pivotal moment in American cultural history, when the elaborate mechanisms of Hollywood image-making finally gave way to a more complex reality, and when a disease that had been stigmatized and ignored became impossible for the nation to dismiss. 1. Cary Grant, the man behind the mask. We arrive now at the most surprising and personally significant name on Randolph Scott's list, a man universally regarded as the epitome of sophisticated heterosexual charm, whose immaculate public image concealed a much more complex private reality. Cary Grant's position at the top of our countdown reflects not just his enormous stardom, but also his unique relationship with Randolph Scott himself. Born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England, in 1904, Grant emerged from working-class origins and a traumatic childhood. His mother disappeared when he was 11, and he was told she had died. In reality, his father had committed her to a mental institution, a fact Grant wouldn't discover until he was 31 years old. This early experience of profound deception and loss would shape his understanding of the gap between appearance and reality throughout his life. Before becoming Hollywood's most elegant leading man, the young Archibald Leach was a traveling performer, joining the Bob Pender troupe of acrobats at age 14. This early theatrical training gave him remarkable physical grace that would later distinguish his screen performances. After touring America with the troupe, he decided to stay, working in vaudeville and eventually making his way to Broadway before Hollywood beckoned. What people often forget about Cary, Randolph Scott reportedly observed, is that his entire persona was a deliberate creation. He wasn't born Cary Grant. He invented Cary Grant. He once famously said, "Everyone wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant." That wasn't just a clever line, it was a profound truth about his life. Grant's transformation from Archie Leach to screen icon required conscious study and effort. He methodically constructed his sophisticated persona by observing wealthy patrons during his early years performing in New York and London. He taught himself proper diction, refined mannerisms, and the social graces that would later seem so effortless on screen. The immaculate Cary Grant that audiences adored was essentially a masterful performance that never stopped. What makes Grant's story particularly significant is his lengthy domestic arrangement with Randolph Scott. Beginning in 1932, the two actors established a shared residence that would last, with some interruptions, for over a decade. They initially lived together in a house in Los Feliz before moving to a Santa Monica beach house that became known in Hollywood circles as Bachelor Hall. What distinguished their living arrangement from typical bachelor roommates was how openly they presented it to the public. Fan magazines like Photoplay and Modern Screen regularly published photo spreads showing the two stars in domestic settings, preparing breakfast together, by their pool, playing with their dogs, and creating what appeared to be an idyllic home life. Those photographs are extraordinary historical documents, noted film historian William Mann. They show two of Hollywood's biggest male stars essentially displaying domestic partnership, but framed in a way that contemporary audiences could accept without question. It's hiding in plain sight. The articles accompanying these intimate photos typically characterize their arrangement as an economical choice by two frugal bachelors, or as a practical fraternal bond between two hard-working actors. The text provided plausible deniability, while the images themselves told a potentially different story. "We weren't being completely deceptive," Scott reportedly said years later. "We were showing our life together, but allowing people to interpret it through the lens that made them comfortable." The studios approved because it humanized two of their valuable stars without threatening the romantic fantasy we represented on screen. This arrangement confounds simple modern categories. Were Grant and Scott romantic partners in the contemporary sense, roommates with a deep friendship, or something else entirely? The evidence remains ambiguous, and both men maintained lifelong privacy about the exact nature of their relationship. What's clear is that they shared a profound bond that accommodated the complex realities of their era and profession. Both eventually married women, Grant 5 times and Scott twice, in arrangements that provided companionship and family life that was genuine in its own way, while also satisfying studio expectations and public expectations. Cary found a way to live truthfully within impossible constraints. Scott reportedly said, "He created a space where he could be himself, at least privately, while giving the public the Cary Grant they demanded. The toll was considerable, but he managed it with remarkable grace." Grant's sophisticated screen persona made him uniquely positioned to navigate these complexities. Unlike more conventionally masculine stars, he projected a cosmopolitan elegance that allowed for greater flexibility in his public image. The characters he played often contained subtle layers of ambiguity and playfulness, particularly in classic comedies like Bringing Up Baby, The Philadelphia Story, and I Was a Male female war bride. Film scholar Andrew Britton has noted how Grant's performances often involve gender play and identity transformation, disguises, role reversals, and moments of cross-dressing that were presented as comic but carried deeper resonances. Grant maintained plausible deniability while allowing perceptive viewers to glimpse the complex man behind the perfect facade. What made Cary remarkable, observed Scott, was how he channeled his divided life into art. The double consciousness required to live as he did, being simultaneously himself and his public image, gave his performances a unique quality. The tension between what is revealed and what is concealed energizes every frame he appears in. Grant's personal struggle was reflected in his well-documented interest in psychotherapy and his experiments with LSD therapy in the 1950s, when the substance was still legal and considered a promising psychiatric tool. He would later credit these therapeutic experiences with helping him reconcile the various aspects of his identity and find greater personal peace. "I have spent the greater part of my life fluctuating between Archie Leach and Cary Grant," he once said, unsure of either, suspecting each. When Grant died in 1986 at age 82, he had achieved something remarkable, a complete integration of his manufactured persona with his public legacy. For most audiences, he remained the quintessential romantic leading man, the benchmark of masculine elegance against which all others were measured. Yet for those who knew him more intimately, including Randolph Scott, there was an understanding of the complex, thoughtful man behind the perfect image. Cary succeeded where many of us only partially managed, Scott reportedly said toward the end of his life. He built a life that accommodated both the world's demands and his own needs. He found love, created art that has endured, and ultimately made peace with himself. In an era that denied men like us the right to live openly, that was perhaps the most one could hope to achieve. What makes the Grant-Scott relationship so significant historically is how it challenges simplistic understandings of sexuality and identity in Hollywood's golden age. These men created lives of meaning and connection within constraints that modern observers can scarcely imagine, finding ways to express authenticity even while maintaining necessary public facades. The stories Randolph Scott shared about these 6 Hollywood legends, Cary Grant, Rock Hudson, Montgomery Clift, Merv Griffin, Cesar Romero, and Jim Nabors, illuminate a hidden dimension of cinema's golden age. Behind the glamorous facade of studio-era Hollywood lay complex human realities that only now can be fully acknowledged. What's particularly striking is the diverse ways these men responded to similar constraints. Clift's sensitive nature made the contradiction between public and private self unbearable, ultimately contributing to his self-destruction. Hudson managed the divide more successfully until illness forced an unwanted revelation. Grant crafted a sophisticated screen persona that allowed him greater flexibility while maintaining necessary ambiguity. Romero created a lifelong role as the charming bachelor that provided both protection and a genuine expression of his elegant personality. Griffin built an empire that gave him control rather than remaining subject to studio demands. And Nabors found private happiness that remained separate from his public persona for decades. Each man found his own path through an impossible situation, Scott reportedly observed near the end of his life. There was no perfect solution, no way to be fully authentic in a world that demanded performance. But each found moments of truth and connection despite the constraints. Scott's own life reflected similar complexities. His first marriage in 1936 to Marion DuPont, a prominent American heiress and equestrian sportswoman, lasted only 3 years, but resulted in an unusual postscript. Marion chose to retain Scott's surname for the remaining 44 years of her life, suggesting a relationship that had meaning beyond conventional understanding. His second marriage to Patricia Stillman in 1944 proved remarkably enduring, lasting 43 years until Scott's death in 1987. They adopted 2 children and maintained a stable family life that stood in contrast to many Hollywood marriages. Whatever its private nature, the Stillman-Scott union provided companionship and stability that was both genuine and socially advantageous. Throughout his career, Scott maintained a dignified reserve both on and off screen. His Western heroes were men of few words but deep integrity, a characterization that seemed to reflect his personal approach to life. Unlike some stars who became embittered by the constraints of their era, Scott found ways to create meaning and connection while maintaining the privacy he valued. The world that forced Grant, Hudson, and their contemporaries to live divided lives has changed dramatically since Randolph Scott's death in 1987. Legal reforms have eliminated criminalization of homosexuality, social attitudes have evolved evolved toward greater acceptance, and popular culture increasingly celebrates rather than stigmatizes LGBTQ identities. Today's Hollywood stars can openly acknowledge same-sex relationships without fear of career destruction, a transformation that would have seemed unimaginable to actors of Scott's generation. The contrast between then and now underscores both how far society has progressed and how profound the constraints once were. Yet the legacy of that earlier era continues to shape our understanding of Hollywood's golden age. The films these actors created remain cultural touchstones, now viewed through a more nuanced understanding of the personal struggles behind the performances. Far from diminishing their achievements, this awareness adds poignancy and depth to work that has stood the test of time. Scott's revelations about his 6 colleagues came toward the end of his life, after most of the men in question had passed away. His timing reflected both a respect for their privacy and an understanding that their complete stories deserved to be known, not to satisfy gossip, but to honor the full measure of their courage and accomplishment. These weren't just great actors, Scott reportedly said. They were men of remarkable character who found ways to survive and even thrive in a world that denied their right to exist authentically. If that isn't courage, I don't know what is. In sharing these stories, Randolph Scott performed a final service to friends and colleagues who had never been fully seen during their lifetimes. He ensured that future generations would understand not just their artistic legacies, but the personal strength it took to create those legacies in the face of extraordinary obstacles. As we look back on Hollywood's golden age through the lens Scott provided, we gain a richer understanding of both the art these men created and the complex lives they lived. Their films take on new layers of meaning, their performances additional dimensions of poignancy and authenticity. The masks they wore in public, rather than diminishing their achievements, make those achievements all the more remarkable. And that brings us to the end of our countdown of the 6 Hollywood legends named by Randolph Scott, men who created timeless art while navigating the profound challenges of their era. Their stories remind us that behind Hollywood's carefully constructed public images lay complex human realities that deserve to be understood with both historical accuracy and compassion. If you've enjoyed this deeper look into cinema history, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to Legacy News. We're dedicated to bringing you meticulously researched stories that go beyond the headlines and publicity photos to reveal the authentic lives of the stars who shaped American culture. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Which of these actors' stories surprised you most? Are there other aspects of Hollywood history you'd like us to explore in future videos? Thank you for joining us for this journey into the shadows and light of cinema's most formative era. Until next time, this is Legacy News, where we believe that understanding the past helps us appreciate both how far we've come and how far we still have to go.